Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 16th of January 2025. This is a gargantuan video, or at least I hope it won't be too long, but my goodness, there's an awful lot to talk about because it's effectively a two-day geopolitical update, and everything is happening. There are these hearings that are relevant to Ukraine with people like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and the likes saying stuff about Ukraine. There's all sorts of people. There are all sorts of people visiting Kyiv at the moment. There are many people discussing peace in terms of in the US political realm and Ukraine. And so we're going to be discussing proposals and suggestions concerning peace. An awful lot. Okay, start with Mark Rutte. He's the Secretary General of NATO. Our future security is at stake. To prevent war, we must be prepared for it. It is time to think like in wartime. He said the main threats to the world, the main threats at the moment are terrorism, nuclear proliferation, disinformation, and climate change. Really interesting that he puts disinformation in there as one of the biggest threats at the moment to global security, and I would say disinformation is right up there. Okay, moving from NATO to Keir Starmer. So he's finally got over. I say finally because it's been 6 months since he won the election, or his party won the election, and he hasn't yet gone to Kyiv. I don't know whether he's waiting to see how the American election would go, and then there have been all sorts of issues in the UK to do with our sort of finances and the economy, etc., etc. So I'll start with the news that British and Northern Ireland Prime Minister, says Tim White, is in Kyiv this morning to sign a 100-year agreement with Ukraine, so that's pretty substantial. It's the first visit to Ukraine of Keir Starmer since he won the election more than 6 months ago, welcomed by Valery Zelensky, who is the ambassador to London. She didn't realise that Zelensky was so tall, to be honest. There you go. Now, talking about issues we have in the economy in the UK, pound is not doing too good. Inflation is looking slightly better, but our gilts, our bonds, if you like, government bonds for debt have become more pricey. Things are not looking good. But it's worth reminding ourselves, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, mentioned how much the UK's debt interest is costing us. And she's absolutely right, because it is a big problem. But a very substantial portion of that debt was added during her tenure, or at least the tenure of the Conservative government. UK debt in 2010 was 1 trillion, and UK debt in 2024 was 2.8178 trillion. In other words, rather like people who say the GOP in the United States are the ones who are better at running the economy, but when you look at the stats, they're the one that actually add to the deficit and don't add the jobs. And actually, it seems like there's this thing where there's this trope that I think there's a lot of truth in, that the Democrats in the US take over from poor economies and make them good, and then Republican leaders then take over and then celebrate how good the economy is, which is all the work done. That's what happened in 2016 after Obama had 8 years of making the economy good. Trump took over and said, look how good I am. We're going to return to this idea because he's just done this again with foreign diplomacy. And there's the idea that Biden's done a really good job with the economy, and Trump's going to take over and say, look how good the economy is. Well, actually, when you look at the UK, this is when the Conservatives took over, just there. And this is public debt rising above the size of the UK economy. Just absolutely hammered. Yes, there was a global recession, 2008 recession, but 14 years should be long enough time to sort that out. And the last lot didn't do a particularly good job, and now the present lot have to kind of sort it out. And that has meant that Keir Starmer's eyes have been somewhat diverted from things like Ukraine. And luckily, we've got John Healey, who's an excellent, I think, defense secretary, and actually David Lammy I quite rate as well. They are doing a good job for Ukraine to keep Ukraine right in our sights. Ben Wallace, a former defense secretary for the Conservatives, who I like as well, said he's just written a comment piece in the Telegraph saying we must put Russia in a prison and build the walls high. This is really strong rhetoric, and it would be nice to hear this from the incoming American administration. We do hear pretty strong rhetoric from our present government on Russia. So I think we're sorted in the UK. Generally, you're hearing that kind of rhetoric from many in Europe, in those big countries, in the Baltics and the Nordics. But definitely would like to hear that kind of rhetoric from the incoming Trump administration. I don't think we do. And that is a real worry. And we're going to come to something that's probably one of the most worrying signs in terms of the incoming administration that has happened. Big bit of news, almost did this as breaking news. I think it's a bad sign. Okay, Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto has arrived in Kyiv as well, so busy in Kyiv at the moment. During his visit, he will hold a number of institutional meetings, according to the Italian embassy. There is thought that the Italians are going to help with air defense. SAMP-T, I don't know if that's going to be made under license in Ukraine, or Ukraine will be able to help make, I don't know, interceptors or something. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with regard to EU defense production going forward, with their strategy wanting 60% of procurement to come from within the EU. What happens if the US pushes the EU away? And we're going to talk about that, because actually there's some pretty unhelpful rhetoric coming out. So if they're going to push away allies like the EU, then the EU is going to have to become more self-sufficient, and that will possibly hurt the American military-industrial complex a little bit. So interesting to see where Ukraine go with regard to, I mean, they're going to want as much as they can get from within the EU and from within the US, but they might have to sort of not pick a side, but at the end of the day, Europe is closer, geographically closer, and working more closely with those military concerns might be more beneficial to Ukraine. I don't know. Zelensky has met with Polish President Andrzej Duda to discuss defense politics and sanctions. Actually, he was in Poland. There's a lot of talk about the Volume massacre, isn't it? Grateful to Poland for unwavering support of Ukraine's NATO membership. Duda consistently champions this cause. So the PIS president, the Law and Justice Party president in Poland, Duda, who's a different party to the coalition government, is both sides of the aisle very strongly support Ukraine in Poland. But there are these issues of the massacre that is a kind of cultural, historical issue that needs some kind of closure from 1945 that Poland is trying to negotiate at the moment. And they're looking to exhume bodies from that in April, which is a good sign. That needs to be sorted out. But Duda appears to be a strong advocate for Ukraine joining NATO, which has to happen. They need that security guarantee. If there's going to be a ceasefire, there's going to be peace, they need a security guarantee. So it's either NATO or it's something functionally the same as NATO Article 5. And if the US aren't, if Trump is not going to let Ukraine into NATO, what's going to happen? So interesting that Duda is a fan of that. Thank you for 45 aid packages with the 46th in preparation, says Zelensky of Poland. And also meeting Donald Tusk, who said after the end of the hostilities, Poland will be one of the guarantors of Ukraine's security as a NATO member. So that is to say that Poland as a NATO member, not Ukraine as a NATO member, Poland as a NATO member, will guarantee security. So does that mean Polish peacekeepers will be on the ground in Ukraine? I don't know. Zelensky then said Russia has more tanks, helicopters and planes, but Ukraine produces more drones. I think this talks to the idea that we are seeing more and more that Ukraine is really struggling for people, and they're trying to replace people with drones, I think. Donald Tusk said Russia planned acts of air terror, not just against Poland, but against airlines across the globe. So this is talking about the such sabotage attempts as the incendiary device in the DHL plane, Germany, and also Birmingham in the UK. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because there are claims that they might have happened with US planes, but the US asked for it not to happen, type thing. Anyway, New York Times reports that Moscow planned to put incendiary devices in cargo planes bound for the US, so that's what we're going to talk about later. And the CZ governor, Russia, has conducted thousands of attempts to attack European railways. I don't know what governor, is that a governor in Czechia? I don't know. Or the Czechian government. Right, Russia has planned air terror against Polish and global airlines, so that's what we just heard. Tusk emphasized that these acts of sabotage represent, quote, a version of war that Russia has declared against the entire world. we are starting to hear more rhetoric of we are at war, and it's Russia that has waged this war on us. We need to recognize that we're at war. Cyber war and sabotage and hybrid war, these are all euphemisms for war. We're just at war with Russia. Now, Edward Hunter Christie, in referring to the Politico article, so Politico article says the EU is ramping up support, an early warning system and a rapid response team to help its hospitals fight off cyber attacks from hacker groups, it said yesterday. And this is the idea that we are at war, cyber war, hybrid war. Cyber attacks, says Christie, against our health systems is another aspect of Russia's pre-war hostilities against our nations. This is not often stated openly, but it is publicly known, notably thanks to French President Macron's statements on the issue. So he said way back that, and he had that discussion with those two journalists on a half an hour chat on national television where he talked about how serious the threat is from Russia, which is I thought was brilliant at the time. And all our leaders need to do that. I was saying at the time, Rishi Sunak, because it went back that far, should be going on TV and talking about this. We should have this rhetoric and recognizing the Russian threat very publicly and very consistently. It needs to happen in particular in the US. Now, talking about sabotage, Anton Gerashchenko gives a summary here. The main topic of discussion at the Baltic Sea NATO Allies Summit was the Eagle S incident and the resolute Finnish response to it. So the ship that tried or succeeded in cutting cables and tried to cut others in the Baltic Sea. So the Baltic Sentry mission, this mission announced by Mark Rutte, will act as a deterrent, and NATO will coordinate the navies of the Baltic allies in sharing information, surveillance and response. Stubb, the Finnish Prime Minister, promised that NATO will try to, quote, always stay at least one step ahead of the threat from the incompetent and indifferent eastern neighbour. Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michel called Finland's handling of the Eagle S incident a benchmark for the rest of NATO countries. The allies at the summit are in agreement about responding to further incidents swiftly and resolutely within the bounds of international law. The allies have also assembled a team of legal experts to gain a better understanding of how these incidents may affect the freedom of navigation in the Baltic. President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, in particular, cited a Finnish law that allows Finland to seize ships if there is an imminent risk of natural disaster. And in the joint statement following the summit, the participants once again underlined the risk of the Russian shadow fleet poses to the maritime and environmental security in the region and globally. Okay, Chinese business has started buying out distressed assets from Russian entrepreneurs, Russian media report. This is massively significant. So you have had for some time Russia and Russian generals even worrying about China becoming this imperial state, and that Russia would be a mere vassal state of China. This is why before the war you had Russian air defenses and military materiel lined up not against the Ukrainian border but against the Chinese border. So they've war gamed for a long time against China invading Russia from the east. This is absolutely been predicted. I predicted this, that Russia would... China is, my opinion, this speculation. China don't care to some degree whether Russia win or lose a war. If Russia win the war, they're going to do that, but they will be incredibly attrited, economically and militarily. China can step in and say, hey, we'll help you out there. We'll sell you loads of weaponry. We'll sell you loads of stuff. We'll help out these businesses. And if Russia lose a war outright, then they'll be in an even worse situation. And Russia will just sweep in and say, right, to help you, we're your mates, right? We either helped you win or we're your mates and you didn't win, but we're going to help you get you back on your feet. But by getting you back on your feet, we're in a power position. You're in a very weak position. Yeah, I'm going to help you up here, but by the way, I'm going to have this part of your country, and I'm going to help myself to this mining concern and that oil concern. It is happening already. So that's something I've said for 2 years plus. That is happening now. So the Chinese business has started buying out distressed assets from Russian entrepreneurs. According to them, a Chinese company has decided to buy out 100% of LLC Inskaya mine in Russia's Kemerovo region, which was on the verge of bankruptcy. Moreover, the potential owners have already found to whom and where to sell coal. The company's representative Tatiana Silenko said in court the Federal Tax Service has filed claims against the mine to the amount of 230 million rubles, so $2.2 million. Due to its difficult financial situation, the agency granted an installment plan for tax payments. The relevant concessions from the FTS are valid until 2027. In October 2024, Denis Nemyikin, Director General of Vinskaya, reported that 4 Chinese companies are ready to finance the enterprise for 2.4 billion rubles, $23.4 million. China will make the most of Russia's weaknesses. It's a no-limit partnership, and I think that is a cartoon that says it all. And I really think this is a concern for Russia, but they'll have no choice. They will have to enter into this very asymmetrical relationship with full knowledge of what they're doing, but forced to do so. Now, going across to Hungary and Viktor Orban. Orban's US-sanctioned Chief of Staff's Golden Visa scheme. So this is where they've allowed Russian and Chinese citizens into Hungary on these visas, but then that allows them into the Schengen area, the free movement of people around Europe. So you can allow Chinese and Russian spies and ne'er-do-wells into Hungary and thus into the EU. Now, this scheme has allowed 15,000 poorly vetted Chinese nationals, 1,200 Russians, and hundreds of Iranians into the Schengen zone, including Sergei Narishkin's son and Assad's money launderers, according to a V-Square project. A bit of investigative journalism. Goodness me, words are difficult, especially when you've got MS, and I really do struggle to get my words out often. Anyway, massive bit of investigation here into what I think was a hugely problematic decision for Hungary to allow those people in. But of course, that's exactly what China and Russia and Iran would have wanted. And there would be a quid pro quo there where Hungary do get, external investment. They are one of the most corrupt nations in Europe at the moment, and they're one of the poorest operating economies. They're going to want as much as they can get from these larger nations. And it's a bit like the asymmetry of Russia and China. Well, actually, Russia and China and Iran are able to, I think, leverage Hungary to get what they want. Now, Chinese oil companies are snapping up crude oil cargoes from the Middle East and elsewhere due to sanctions against Russia and Iran. Bloomberg has reported. Traders say that several Chinese companies are sending out urgent inquiries to buy crude for prompt delivery, adding multiple grades were being considered from the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas. This move stems from concerns that small private refiners, already under pressure, could be forced to slash operating rates and cut back fuel output without access to discounted Russian and Iranian crude. If the so-called teapots falter, larger state refiners will have to step in to prevent a domestic shortfall of fuels such as diesel, taking up market share, but crucially guaranteeing energy security, which is a major concern for Beijing. And I guess the more that nations adhere to the sanctions on Russia and those secondary sanctions, the more you're going to need to get crude from elsewhere, and the markets are going to want to, if OPEC Plus, the US can start producing more and more, which is what Donald Trump wants to do, then that's not too much of a problem. The EU is considering a ban on Russian LNG, aluminium, and aluminium. Bloomberg has reported the phase out of LNG could be enacted as a sanction or part of a roadmap presented by the European Commission next month. Restrictions on aluminium would be gradual, with a time frame yet to be determined, officials have said. And that would be good, turning the screw on the Russian economy by absolutely ruling out Russian LNG and other products like aluminium. Now, tankers caught in the US ban were carrying a fifth of Russia's offshore oil. I've included this here, although I'm going to dip back into this in the American section. According to the International Energy Agency, the latest round of US sanctions against Russian oil could significantly disrupt the Russian oil supply chains, the International Energy Agency said in a monthly report on Wednesday, potentially tightening the global market, which is kind of what we were just talking about. In 2024, the 160 tankers hit by sanctions were carrying more than 1.6 million barrels of Russian oil a day, about 22% of the country's maritime exports, the agency said in a monthly report. For now, however, the IEA has maintained its oil supply forecast, will update it and will update it as the situation evolves. While the new US sanctions are significant, their full impact on Russia's ability to pump and ship oil is still unclear, says the IEA. A total of 270 tankers have been sanctioned for carrying Russian oil, and you can see the US sanctioned tankers just suddenly shot up. That's making a huge difference there. And then these ones in dark blue are UK sanctioned tankers, and then the light blue are EU. So a lot of those came in November to December from the EU, earlier from the UK, and then the US just now with a massive sanction list. Okay. Now, the Middle East Eye has reported that Iran, in its treaty with Russia, has refused to recognize Crimea and other occupied territories as Russian. That's really interesting. What is going on there? So for Iran, a country that seems absolutely shoulder to shoulder with Russia, appears not to want to recognize Crimea and occupied territories as Russian. Wow. Right, Germany. This is Edward Hunter Christie talking about Germany, taking it from Deutschlandfunk. The Scholz government is preparing a proposed amendment to Germany's Aviation Security Act to allow the armed forces to shoot down unmanned systems that pose a threat to life or to critical facilities. So this is on the back of reports that there have been these drones, like we've heard in the US, like we've heard following certain ships around, military ships. We heard reports that in Germany there were drones that were potentially getting up to no good. No one really knew where they came from and what they were doing over sensitive facilities. Under the current legislation in peacetime, the armed forces are only allowed to divert or fire warning shots at unmanned systems. The proposed change will have to be voted on in Parliament, but that will be quite useful for the German government to just say, right, we don't know who you are, we're going to shoot you down. I hope Bundestag members will understand and rapidly approve. Germany must be able to defend itself under peacetime legislation. Hostile actors such as Russia do not care about formal boundaries between war and peace. They just attack below the belt all the time. And there is that asymmetry between what the rest of the world are prepared to do and what Russia's prepared to do. Russia's prepared to do pretty much anything, and that gives them that kind of advantage. We need laws. It needs to be legally done. We need laws to help protect ourselves from what Russia is willing to do. I won't show you that video below. It's an absolutely shocking video below. You can just about see it. This Russian girl puts a toddler on a bed and just fully fly kicks it in the back and sends it across the room. It's horrific. Lots of people are talking about that. Okay, so Georgia, it's reported that tonight in their Sheraton Hotel in Batumi, so a couple of nights ago, more members of the Georgian Dream Parliament and the Supreme Council of Adjara attacked the leader of the For Georgia party, former Prime Minister Georgi Gakaria, who's now in hospital. So the Georgian Dream Party, the ruling party, seems to be fine with going around and beating up opposition politicians. It's absolutely sickening. Georgia, it's looking pretty stark in Georgia at the moment. Transnistria, that sort of annexed region of Moldova, Transnistria the head from there travels to Russia for talks amid energy crisis, according to Russian state media. Vadim Krasnoselsky, head of Moldova's Russian-controlled region Transnistria, held talks in Moscow regarding the energy crisis, whereby they're refusing to take energy from Moldova and from Ukraine even, hoping that Russia will turn back on the gas somehow. But it's pretty dire for the businesses and the citizens of Transnistria. Now, in Slovakia, the opposition is not only just preparing, it has submitted a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Fico for his pro-Russia stances on the back of they're not huge protests around the country, but there have been some significant protests against the government. Opposition leaders accuse Fico of abandoning Slovakia's interests and, quote, reorientating the country to the east while criticising his global trips and lack of attention to domestic issues. The Slovak opposition has then submitted that no confidence vote, and it's due to take place within 7 days. So that's going to be imminent. Absolutely one to look out for that. Now, a Slovak student, I said this was as a result of the presidential election in Croatia on my live stream the other day. I want to show you this. This is actually Slovakia, and Jonathan Fink was right. This is a Slovakian president who is not Robert Fico, he's the Prime Minister, but the President is pro-Russian as well. Here is a young chap
Simon Omaník za zisk bronzowej medaili
taking an award, shaking hands. He's got a Ukraine ribbon on, the President goes to shake hands and he says no, and then they stand next to each other. President has a wry smile on his face. This guy is clearly pro-Ukrainian, doesn't look at the President at all, and walks off. Delightful. I absolutely love it. I love stuff like that. Brilliant. Now, Robert Fico's come out and says, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico suggested slapping the teenager who refused to shake hands with the President. Fico harshly criticised the teenager who refused to shake hands with the country's president, calling him an immature teenager wearing a Ukrainian flag on his clothes. Fico proposed drastic measures, saying, quote, someone here needs 3 slaps. I'd start with the anti-state media. Sharing his personal perspective, Fico said, if I had complained at home about a teacher pulling my hair, my mum would have given me 2 more slaps. Teachers were always respected and the truth was on their side. Of course, this is to assume that the truth is on the president's side in his pro-Russian stance and that he should be respected, which is arguably not the case. Prime Minister added that, and this is what in philosophy we would call a false equivalence or a false analogy. The Prime Minister added that had he been in the president's place, he would have stripped the student of his award and sent him where he belongs, right in front of all the media. He also called the president's respectful response to the teenager a mistake. There you go. Right. Now, I am worried about how the EU is being seen by the incoming Trump administration as the enemy. It appears that everyone in the MAGA right is able to slag off allies, Ukraine, democratically elected governments and politicians from around the allied world. That you can talk about slapping tariffs on Mexico and Canada, slapping tariffs on the EU, but not slagging off Russia and not slagging off China. It seems abhorrent to me. Anyway, we have Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is an egregious human being. Kate Clonick says, what the last 2 weeks has made super clear, it's not just Facebook versus the Digital Services Act, as it always was, and it's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene versus the DSA, she doesn't care, it's the USA versus the EU. This is geopolitics all the way down. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene said officially, this is her official Twitter, it's difficult for someone like me, who has been shadow banned and censored by Mark Zuckerberg for years, along with so many other Americans, to come to Zuckerberg's defense. However, it's our responsibility to stand up for American companies against European regulators. After all, we provide Europe's defense, so we don't really care what they have to say. We don't really care what Europe has to say. And we are starting to see a division between the US and the EU, between the US and Europe. And it is really, I think, troubling. When you see Elon Musk's attack on the UK government, on the German government, it is absolutely despicable. That it's deemed that the easy targets are the allies. Actually, what you have is this populist ideology within the inner circle of the Trump administration that stretches out to a lot in the MAGA right, that wants a purge of the American government, the purge of all forms of liberalism, and you want some kind of autocracy replacing it that falls in line with Project 2025. This is abundantly clear, and unfortunately, the foreign policy of the US kind of follows along with that. And we're going to get onto that in a second. While there are some good signs, there are some hopeful signs, maybe, if you squint your eyes, there are some very obvious bad signs to the checks and balances on the US and their government. Now, in terms of the UK, just something, I've been worried that the UK is becoming far more American and divided. And it's kind of like the populist right in America are trying to whip up a storm in the UK, as with Elon Musk. But you're also seeing other similarities and other entities involved in the American political system find their way over here. Like there are some migrants over here that I really would rather not have. One of them is the Heartland Institute. So I've written about the Heartland Institute previously. It's one of these think tanks that is incredibly problematic. Now, we've already seen this with like the Heritage Foundation, which Tucker Carlson's heavily involved in. His Tucker Carlson's father, lobbies for Viktor Orban. I've written articles on this. I've written articles on Heartland Foundation. But anyway, Heartland Institute, Heritage Foundation here, involved with Hungarian government proxy is spending a fortune to influence public opinion in the US, and they do that through the Danube Institute, which also funds the Heritage Foundation, then CPAC as well, so on and so forth. Well, we've now got the Heartland Institute, and Nigel Farage and Liz Truss have launched the US climate denial group, Heartland Institute, which is kind of a pro-business, anti-climate science think tank from the US, or lobbyist group from the US that has been involved in producing disinformation for a long time on all sorts of things, but very much including the climate. And as Mark Rutte said, the climate is one of our 4 big challenges to global security. And yet here in the UK, here we are welcoming in these really disruptive US ideologues and ideologically agenda-driven entities such as the Heartland Institute. So, I am worried that we're getting divisive politics in the UK. We're getting a whipping up of the populist right. We're seeing Elon Musk getting involved in doing that, along, breaking bread with Dominic Cummings, who would love to see this. We've got Nigel Farage becoming more and more emboldened. These are political movements that are essentially much more aligned with Russia than they are with free and fair democracies. It's just so worrying that the US might be wanting to kind of move towards seeing the EU as more of an enemy than an incredible ally. Now, before we get on to one of the most worrying things that's just happened in the US, let's do a few sort of Biden things, as he's only president for another 4 days. Biden administration, about to finish its term, is reportedly urging European allies to support transferring frozen Russian funds to a special account as a negotiation tool for Ukraine. They've discussed the idea with Trump's team, who do indeed back it. So it could be that $300 billion might get used as a whole. The US has announced Trump-proof sanctions against Russia. And here it might include some of these. So Biden administration says Kyiv finally starts to go after those helping Russia massively evade sanctions. Alex Rafoglu says just now US disrupts Russia's sanctions evasion schemes established between actors in Russia and China, and targets a Kyrgyz Republic based financial institution. Today, the US is sanctioning nearly 250 enablers of Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. As part of this action, State Department is designating more than 150 individuals and entities. Department of State saying, quote, building on our January the 10th targeting of Russia's energy sector, today's action aims to thwart sanctions evasion, particularly by actors based in the People's Republic of China, and to degrade Russia's military-industrial base. Additional designations target subsidiaries of State Atomic Energy Corporation Rosatom. So it's the first time that the nuclear industry in Russia has been targeted here. Concurrently, the Treasury Department says Rafoglu is redesignating nearly 100 previously sanctioned targets across Russia's financial services, energy and defense, and related material sectors. Treasury is also designating entities involved in several financial sanctions evasion schemes. Antony Blinken's statement on hitting Russia's military-industrial base and enablers of sanctions evasion goes, quote from Blinken, building on our January 10th, yes, so it says some of the same things. That's not... yeah, it's sort of what we just heard, but in Blinken's words. Building on our January the 10th sanctions targeting Russia's energy sector, today the United States has designated over 250 enablers of Putin's war against Ukraine. These sanctions will further constrain Russia's ability to wage war and thwart sanctions evasion. Of these targets, the Department of State is sanctioning more than 150 individuals and entities involved in Russia's defense industry and supporting its military-industrial base. These designations encompass dozens of companies outside Russia that facilitate Russia's evasion of our sanctions, particularly in the People's Republic of China, which remains the largest supplier of critical defense-related goods to Russia. Additional designations target subsidiaries of State Atomic Energy Corporation Rosatom. The Department of Treasury is redesignated under Executive Order 13662. Nearly 100 major entities across Russia's financial, defense, and energy sectors. Treasury is also designating participants in a sanctions evasion scheme established between Russia and the PRC to facilitate cross-border payments for sensitive dual-use goods, as well as Kyrgyz Republic-based financial institution that worked with Russian officials and a US-designated bank to circumvent our sanctions. We continue to bring available tools to bear on disrupting Russia's illegal war against Ukraine together with the G7 and other like-minded partners. We stand in solidarity with Ukrainians in defending their homeland against Russia's illegal war of choice. This is huge stuff from the US, really, really important, being reported on by a number of people, press releases about that. So that is, I think, significant, possibly Trump-proof, but I don't know whether Trump can come in and lift those sanctions, lift those regulations put in place on, I don't know, we shall see. As I said before, the US has also sanctioned a whole number of ships as well, and that's really significant in closing those loopholes and stopping Russia from making money off oil exports. US intelligence has exposed a Russian scheme to sabotage cargo shipments on US flights. I hinted at this earlier. The Biden administration issued a stern warning to Moscow. I mean, this is freaking war, right? They've uncovered a scheme for Russia to blow stuff up, US stuff up. So why is this not like front page news in the US so that everyone is fully on board with who the bad guys are? The Biden administration issued a stern warning to Moscow, emphasizing consequences for any further actions endangering US interests. And there were some claims that they were going to do, like the Russians were going to do this, and the US kind of found out about it and told them not to, basically. It's like this was a kind of known thing. I don't know. Anyway, the PRC and Russia present a much greater long-term threat than terrorist groups, according to Michael Casey, Director for National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Now, this is something that the American public need to hear, rather than people in these kind of positions who say these statements in like highfalutin establishments to a select audience that are in total agreement, but the general public doesn't filter down. So, Anton Gerashenko says the threat from Russia and China looms larger than ever as spyware technology proliferates worldwide. Casey stressed the urgent need for government and industry to bolster cybersecurity defenses against these nation states whose actions could significantly harm US critical infrastructure. The PRC and Russia present a much greater longer-term threat than terrorist groups. Said Casey, he cited the wide-reaching capabilities of state-sponsored cyber attacks, such as the China-linked infiltration of major US telecommunications companies, which targeted political leaders and critical infrastructure. Unlike terrorists, he noted nation-backed attackers can disrupt systems on a massive scale, especially during conflicts. Casey also highlighted the rapid rise of spyware firms and their accessibility to governments, criminal groups, and ransomware operators. While infamous entities like Israel's NSO group grab headlines, many lesser-known companies have emerged globally, selling advanced tools that make mobile devices particularly vulnerable. He warned nearly 100 countries have bought spyware and they're using it. Right, okay. Now we come on to the bad news and the sign that the US is removing checks and balances to its own incoming government, that the incoming GOP or the new GOP, this kind of MAGA GOP, is a completely different entity from the old Republican Party. The Reagan Republicanism of old seems to be dying a death, and I'm wondering whether, rather like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, you're either going to have to get a new Republican Party, like a third party set up, or the Democrats will have to become a really wide church, a really large umbrella for people who are clearly not welcome in the new GOP. So this is deeply, deeply worrying for Ukraine and for the future of the American Republican Party and government. Breaking news. Speaker Johnson, in what appears to be a direction from Donald Trump, has decided to remove Mike Turner as chair of the House Intelligence Committee, according to Punchbowl News. His sin? He's too pro-NATO, too supportive of Ukraine, and too close to the intelligence agencies, which, you need to be being in that position. So Turner confirmed the news and told CBS's Margaret Brennan that Johnson cited concerns from Mar-a-Lago as justification for the removal. This is extremely concerning. This is worthy. I might just do a separate breaking news for this, because I think this is absolutely terrible. This is terrible. Jim Hines, a top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, just told a group of us that removing Turner, quote, sends a shiver down my spine, and that he is enormously concerned. Said Turner is the kind of guy who was quick to bend the knee to Trump and kept his eyes on the prize of oversight. Isn't the kind of guy. So Turner wouldn't bend his knee to Trump. And his eyes on the prize, which is doing my job, is for the US, Constitution, intelligence, etc., etc. No, he's not enough on board with the MAGA agenda, and so he's out. That's bad for Ukraine. It's bad for US intelligence. It's bad for the security. I mean, we're living in a world of Tulsi Gabbards and Pete Hegseths, and like, people have a go at me for like being critical of Trump and being critical of that MAGA American ideology. But my goodness, it's a pretty obvious position to take if you're concerned with global security, and actually if you're concerned with the US going forward. If you're removing people like Mike Turner, who's someone that I previously have sung the praises of because he's a decent politician doing the decent thing for the US, like, if that's who you're going to target, that's telling you everything you need to know. Everything you need to know. That Mar-a-Lago has come from Donald Trump. Donald Trump wouldn't have a clue. Those are the people inside that circle who are deeply, deeply dangerous. Adam Kinzinger, a former Republican lawmaker, has said, regardless of your politics, Mike Turner was among the best Intelligence Committee chairmen. The fact that he was fired from Mar-a-Lago proves one thing. There is no oversight, just a rubber stamp Congress. So when Joni Ernst, who herself is a victim of sexual abuse and who is a veteran, has completely done a 180 on Pete Hegseth, who is a veteran and arguably a sexual abuser, people are being either purged, Mike Turner, or are being forced to bend their knees to the autocrat in charge. This is such a worrying stage. Let's listen to Mike Turner.
Let's turn to Ukraine, an issue that's important to you and your fellow Republican chairman, Michael McCaul, who runs the Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman McCaul made a comment this week about what he says sounds like Russian propaganda from some conservative media, and why it's so difficult to explain to Republican voters why supporting Ukraine is important. He told Julia Yaffe, quote, I think Russian propaganda has made its way into the United States, unfortunately, and it's infected a good chunk of my party's base. He singled out primetime shows on conservative channels. Do you agree with him, and how big is this problem?
Oh, it is absolutely true. We see directly coming from Russia attempts to mask communications that are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia messages, some of which we even hear being uttered on the House floor. I mean, there are members of Congress today who still incorrectly say that this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is over NATO, which of course it is not.
And by the way, that's pretty much what Donald Trump has said. So you got Mike Turner saying the truth here, and you have and he said this some time ago, but he's now been hiked out of Congress, or hiked out of the Intelligence Committee on account of him speaking truth to power, but speaking the truth about the threat of Russian influence in American politics.
Vladimir Putin having made it very clear, both publicly and to his own population, that his view is that this is a conflict of a much broader claim of Russia to Eastern Europe, and including claiming all of Ukraine territory as Russia's. Now, to the extent that this propaganda takes hold, it makes it more difficult for us to really see this as an authoritarian versus democracy battle, which is what it is. President Xi of China, Vladimir Putin himself have identified it as such. We need to stand up for democracy. We need to make certain that we know that authoritarian regimes never stop when they start an aggression. Ukraine needs our help and assistance now, and this is a very critical time for the U.S. Congress to step up and provide that aid.
And I'm pretty sure I played that exact video before. And I will sing the praises of people who say the right things. He's a Republican. It's not that I'm anti-Republican. I'm anti-democracy, right? And so when you get rid of someone like that and replace him with some puppet who's going to be undoubtedly more pro-Russia, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Now, the US Defense and State Secretaries, the outgoing ones, have warned that forcing a premature ceasefire in Ukraine would enable Russia to rest, refit, and eventually re-attack, according to New York Times. Lloyd Austin and Antony Blinken argue that any peace deal must ensure Ukraine can deter further Russian aggression and defend their territory and thrive as a sovereign democracy. Cutting aid and forcing a ceasefire would be a capitulation. Quote, pursuing a policy of peace through strength is vital for Ukraine's survival and American security, they write. In a column, the secretaries describe Putin's situation as a painful dilemma, continue taking heavy casualties while making minimal territorial gains, risk domestic instability through mobilization, or enter serious negotiations with Ukraine. But they're right. If you force Ukraine to a negotiated settlement right now, as quickly as possible, without really having Ukraine's best interests at heart, this will not help Ukraine and will only help Russia. Now, I've already talked about this, but Trump's advisors no longer think the Russia-Ukrainian war can end in Trump's first day in office. No shit, Sherlock. Now they acknowledge it can take months or longer to resolve. Quote, the day one promises were a combination of campaign bluster and a lack of appreciation of the intractability of the conflict and the time it takes to staff up a new administration, two Trump associates said. Trump associates saying that Trump was full of campaign bluster and a lack of appreciation. Exactly what it said. It's either one or the other. It turns out it's both. He's one, lying. Two, doesn't understand how serious and complex this issue is. Which means one, he shouldn't have said what he said because it was deeply irresponsible. And two, by allowing him to say this, we are normalizing lying. And I'm sick and tired of people coming to me and saying, stop taking Trump literally. This is like what we hear in biblical exegesis, to be honest, which is when you come across a Christian exegete will look at the Bible and they come across a really difficult passage that shows that whoever in there or God or whatever was being morally really problematic, and they go, oh, okay, it's not meant literally. So as soon as something's problem, you can never. What you're doing is you're ring fencing, in the case this person in the Bible or God, from ever being criticized at all for being wrong or for being morally culpable or morally problematic. Now, those sort of issues will lead to particular beliefs or whatever, but it's exactly the same. I've spent like 15 years writing books about how that's a problem in properly understanding what was being said by the people at the time to the people at the time of the writing of those books, right? This is exactly what's going on here, which is as soon as one of the acolytes of Trump, one of the fawning cult members of the Trump cult, listen to him say something problematic, they go, oh, he's just being, oh, why do you take him literally? But then as soon as he says something you want him to hear, you're like, he means that, that's literal. Who gets to work out what's literal and what's, rhetorical flourishes? And isn't it convenient you do it after the fact, and whenever something turns out not to be true, you go, oh, we didn't mean that. That's not good enough. It's not good enough. And that, here's an exact example of what I mean. Miles Salmon. Don't take Trump literally. Miles Salmon, a different Miles Salmon, different account, several accounts. Hey, you still don't understand Trump. It's crazy to you and others, apparently due to the interpreting him literally. So tell me, when do you know whether he's being truthful or not? Because what he does is he completely undermines his credibility. I don't know when to believe him. If I'm not to take him literally all the time, when is he being truthful and when is he not? How do I get to ask him? You either tell the truth or you don't. If you start smashing up the fact and fiction, we are confused. This is what Russia do with their disinformation. And if you're saying that's what Trump does with everything he says, then I'm sorry, he's a massively, massively irresponsible leader. Now, if he said he was going to solve this war within one day and even before inauguration, I have to believe that he thinks that's true. And now we're told that no, that isn't true because actually he had a lack of appreciation for the intractability of the conflict. So his own advisors are saying, yeah, he meant that. I mean, a bit of campaign bluster, but actually he didn't realise how complex this situation was. Post-election, Trump himself has avoided specific timelines and recently acknowledged that resolving the Russia-Ukrainian war could prove more challenging than achieving a Gaza ceasefire. By the way, something that Biden's just done. Earlier, Trump's incoming Russian-Ukraine envoy, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, told Fox News he aimed for a solution within 100 days, significantly longer than Trump's initial one-day pledge. Former US Ambassador to Ukraine John Herbst called even this extended timeline way too optimistic. I'm sick and tired of people apologising for Trump to allow him to get out of a very sticky situation. He's in a sticky situation because he's put himself there with his own rhetoric. I know I feel really strongly about this, but the man is given an incredible amount of leeway that I just don't think is justified. Right, okay. Trump advisors concede Ukraine peace deal is months away. As we've heard, a dose of reality dawning on the pending Trump presidency. Likely one of many electoral promises Trump will fail to deliver. Certainly not the last, but of course, you know, even though Reuters might say, yeah, it's conceding that the peace deal is far away. It was having a laugh. He didn't really mean it. Zelensky said there is a chance to end the war this year. So maybe not 100 days, maybe not 6 months, but he's talking about possibly this year. That's Zelensky. So he's not thinking a day, 100 days or 6 months. Trump wants to do it. He is able to put pressure on Russia. I don't deny that. Russia is afraid of the USA and China. It is afraid of the United Europe. Europe without the Ukrainian army has no chance of fighting Russia. The Russian army is larger than all the armies of the EU countries combined. There is a threat from Russia to Poland, Romania, the Baltic and Scandinavian countries. I think there's this growing realization that we are involved in this war, however you define war, whether it's hybrid war, cyber war, information war, so on and so forth. We are in a conflict with Russia. Now, former Minister of Foreign Affairs Klimkin has said negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine are already underway. They will simply bring a ready-made document to Kyiv and say that the world will look like this. So there are already those who are saying that, hang on, the US, one would presume here, and Russia appear to be involved in negotiations about the future of Ukraine without Ukraine. And it's really frustrating that although Marco Rubio, the pick for Secretary of State, mentioned Ukraine in a kind of broadly positive manner during his hearing yesterday, he did unfortunately just lay out that Ukraine will have to concede territory, which is like, you're giving it away before you even start negotiations. This is a criticism I've leveled against Trump many a time. And Marco Rubio did it yesterday. Quote, "This war must end. Everyone must be realistic. Both Russia and Ukraine will have to make concessions," said US Secretary of State nominee Marco Rubio. Ukraine's problem is not that it's running out of money, it's that it's running out of Ukrainians. Broadly correct, though. Russia has no chance of taking over all of Ukraine, but it's also unrealistic to believe that Ukraine will be able to return the captured territories. The destruction of Ukraine is extraordinary. It will take generations to restore everything. Millions of Ukrainians no longer live in their homeland and may never return, which is all quite true. But again, unrealistic to believe that Ukraine will be able to return its captured territories. You may think that. Don't say it in public, because you've now said to Russia, it's okay. We're already starting with the belief that Ukraine won't get back its captured territories. So instead of starting up here with a maximalist bid, when you go into negotiations and say, this is what we want, we have now accepted, by talking about this publicly, that we're going to start here. And that Russia will then demand that we get down to here. This is complete insanity. And I'm really glad that actually it's being picked up by Gary Kasparov here. So Gary Kasparov says, this talking point about not restoring Ukrainian territorial integrity is Kremlin and MAGA BS. If there is leverage to kick Russia out of some parts of Ukraine, it will work for the rest because Putin doesn't need any of it. Why say this? The Kerry school of preemptive surrender. That is it. You're preemptively saying, it's okay, Ukraine are going to have to give this up. Don't frickin' say that. So irritating. So Marco Rubio, Trump, and the whole MAGA crew appear to be far more interested in a speedy conclusion rather than a just conclusion to this conflict. Senator Rubio claimed today, says John Jackson, who is a veteran, an American veteran of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, former GOP, so used to be Republican. He's then given a minute and a half saying how Marco Rubio is flat wrong that Ukraine will have to make territorial concessions. All Ukraine needs is a reliable American partner who's committed to victory rather than a decades-long pattern of undermining its security. I prove it in 90 seconds. I'm not going to play that because I've been talking for too long, but you get the point. Putin has reportedly demanded Ukraine never join NATO and remains neutral with a limited army, which is going back to what he had wanted previously, or hints, and this would be absolutely ridiculous. So Putin's fine with going in right up here with his demands, ridiculous things up here, but Ukraine now have to go in down here with their own demands because the US has announced that that's what they're going to start the negotiations. That's their starting point. Starting point is you will concede your territories to Russia. So Russia then go, okay, we'll take that, and then we'll add that they can't be in NATO and they're going to have a limited army. Other demands, NATO can supply weapons, but not for fighting Russia or for fighting Russia or reclaiming territory. And Russia seeks 20% of Ukraine, including Crimea, but open to territorial swaps. Bloomberg reports Russia insists on control over 20% of Ukraine's territory, including Crimea, during negotiations. Moscow is also considering the possibility of exchanging territories. So that's Kursk for, I don't know, part of Luhansk, probably. Adam Kinzinger says, if Russia can invite a foreign nation, so North Korea, to kick Ukraine off its territory, why can't Ukraine invite a foreign nation to help kick out Russia? Why is there this crazy double standards? Sean Pinner says, exactly, it's time NATO gives protection to Ukraine. I'm going to leave it there. I've got so much more to say on the US, which I think is deeply troubling. And it's the idea that basically democracy is under threat in the US. Lots more to say on that. And disinformation. But please don't hit me. Don't anyone ever again hit me with don't take Trump literally. Okay, I can just flip that and says, okay, don't take him literally. Literally everything he says. Literally everything he says. Don't believe it. Think the opposite of. Do that, Miles Salmon. Don't believe a single thing. So if he says he's going to get rid of immigrants, don't believe it. It's not true. Don't take him literally. If he says he's going to improve the economy, don't believe it. If he's going to try and tackle inflation, don't believe it. Don't take him literally, ever. Or maybe we should. I don't know. But you can't go through your political life forcing people to question whether that was something that was true or something that was bombastic rhetoric. I think it's high time that he started being more credible and credulous. Started saying things that had more credibility. Started saying things that we should be justified in believing. He should be more truthful. End of sermon. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.